Take it off! The liberal TV host's voice cut through the studio like a knife. His smirk was confident, certain that he had her cornered. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every second of tension. The audience murmured, some chuckling, others shifting uncomfortably. Across from him, she stood still, calm, composed. She reached up, fingers grazing the red cap on her head, the infamous symbol he despised. But she didn't remove it. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill through the room. "You want me to take this off?" she asked, her voice unwavering. "Why? Because it makes you uncomfortable? Or because it reminds you of something deeper, something you don't want to face?" The studio fell into a stunned silence. Even the host, so quick with his words, had nothing to say. And what she said next? It changed everything. The bright studio lights cast a harsh glow over the stage. The air was thick with tension as the audience waited, eyes darting between the host and the woman sitting across from him. This wasn't just another political debate. It was a moment primed for conflict. The woman, bold, articulate, and unwavering, had been invited onto the show to discuss politics, culture, and the growing division in America. But from the moment she stepped onto the stage wearing that cap, it was clear the conversation was about to take a sharp turn. Sitting across from her was a well-known liberal TV host, notorious for his aggressive interviews and open disdain for certain viewpoints. And now he had found his target. With a smug grin, he leaned forward, eyes locked on the red cap perched on her head, the unmistakable "Make America Great Again" slogan embroidered across the front. To some, the cap was a simple piece of apparel. To others, it was a symbol of defiance, a political statement, even a lightning rod for controversy. It had been worn by millions, supporters who saw it as a call for patriotism, strength, and tradition. But to critics, it represented something far more divisive. And now in this moment, under the glare of the cameras, the cap was more than just fabric and thread. It was a test of conviction, a test of courage. The host smirked. "Take it off," he said, as if daring her to comply. But she didn't flinch, because this wasn't just about a cap. It was about something much bigger: principles, identity, and the right to stand by what you believe. The moment the words left his mouth, a ripple of reactions spread across the studio. Some members of the audience chuckled, nodding in agreement with the host's mocking tone. Others shifted in their seats, sensing the intensity brewing between the two figures on stage. The liberal TV host, a man known for his sharp-tongued takedowns and relentless questioning, leaned forward, eyes locked on the woman before him. His smirk widened as he gestured toward the bright red cap resting atop her head. "You know," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "there was a time when people wore hats like that with pride. But now it's nothing more than a symbol of division, outdated nationalism, and quite frankly, an embarrassment." The audience erupted, half in applause, half in awkward murmurs. Some cheered at his words, emboldened by the host's directness. Others, however, remained silent, sensing that this conversation was about to become something far more than a mere discussion about a piece of clothing. The woman sat still, her expression unreadable. She knew this moment would come. She had worn the cap deliberately, not out of defiance, but as a quiet assertion of her beliefs. The host, emboldened by the crowd's mixed reaction, pressed on. "Tell me something," he continued, leaning back in his chair as if sizing her up. "Why wear something so offensive, so controversial? Do you enjoy stirring the pot? Do you like the attention?" His words were sharp, deliberately laced with implication. He wasn't just questioning her fashion choice, he was questioning her. "Or maybe," he added with a smirk, "you just don't care about how many people this hat offends." Gasps rippled through the audience. The tension was suffocating. The woman, still calm, met his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. The host wasn't finished. "Look, I get it," he said, feigning sympathy. "You want to make a statement, you want to prove a point, but at what cost? You're sitting here, proudly displaying a symbol that, to many, represents hate, exclusion, and everything wrong with this country. Why hold on to something so toxic?" The word hung in the air. Toxic. Some audience members murmured in agreement, others sat frozen, waiting to see how she would respond. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The cameras were rolling. Millions would see this exchange. The host expected her to crumble, to stutter, to second-guess herself, but that wasn't going to happen. Because this wasn't just about a cap. This was about something far greater, and she was about to remind the entire room of it. The woman sitting across from the host wasn't just any guest. She wasn't a politician, nor was she a social media firebrand looking for a viral moment. She was someone who had lived through enough to know that standing firm wasn't always easy, but it was always necessary. As she sat there, her fingers lightly grazing the brim of her red cap, her mind briefly drifted back to the past. She had grown up in a small town, the kind of place where people still looked out for each other. Her father had been a factory worker, her mother a teacher. Money was tight, but values ran deep. From an early age, she was taught that hard work, faith, and resilience weren't just words, they were survival skills. Sunday mornings were spent in church, where she listened intently as the pastor spoke about standing strong in the face of opposition. You don't back down from what you believe in, even when the world pushes back, her father used to say. But she learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. She was in high school when the recession hit. Her father lost his job when the factory shut down. The town that had once been full of life started to wither, stores closed, families moved away, and the future became uncertain. For the first time, she saw what it meant when people in power forgot about the little guy. Her father, once proud and steady, was forced to take odd jobs just to keep food on the table. The American dream they had believed in felt like it was slipping away. And then, years later, something changed. A businessman turned politician came along, speaking directly to people like her family, people who had been forgotten. He didn't sound like the others. He wasn't polished. He wasn't careful with his words, but he was real. And more importantly, he was fighting for them. Her father, once skeptical of politics, had looked at her one evening and said, "This man, he's different. He actually gives a damn." That was the moment she first understood what leadership really meant. Her support for Trump wasn't blind. It wasn't about a party. It was about what he represented: strength, resilience, and standing up for those who had been cast aside. And then, tragedy struck. Her brother, a soldier, had been deployed overseas. He was proud to serve, believing in the ideals of freedom and protecting his country. But when he came home, he struggled. The promises made to veterans often fell short. She watched him fight battles that no one saw, battles that followed him long after the war. When policies changed that finally gave veterans the care they deserved, she saw firsthand what leadership could do. For her, this wasn't about slogans. It was about action. That's why she wore the cap. Not as a provocation, not as a political statement, but as a reminder of her father's struggles, of her brother's sacrifice, of the America her family believed in. Over the years, she had learned that people would judge her for it. She had been called names, lost friends, even been denied service at a cafe once because of what she represented. But she never took it off, because it wasn't about them. It was about what she stood for. And now, sitting across from a TV host trying to belittle her, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The host thought he was in control. He had no idea what was coming next. The studio was silent. The liberal TV host leaned forward, waiting for her to crumble. He had seen it before. People backpedaling, making excuses, trying to soften their stance under the weight of public scrutiny. But she wasn't like them. She took a slow breath, her fingers brushing the brim of her red cap. The camera zoomed in. The host smirked, thinking he had won. And then she spoke. "You're asking me to remove my belief?" Her voice was steady, unwavering. "Let me get this straight," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You want me to take off my cap because it offends you?" The host scoffed. "Not just me. A lot of people see it as a symbol of division." She nodded slowly as if considering his words. And then she smiled, just enough to unsettle him. "Tell me something," she continued. "Would you ask someone to remove a religious symbol? Would you tell someone their culture is offensive?" The host blinked, momentarily thrown off. "That's different," he argued. "Is it?" she shot back. "Or is it only different because you don't agree with it?" The tension in the room thickened. Some audience members exchanged glances. A few even nodded. The host's confidence wavered, but she wasn't done. "This cap represents more than you think." She reached up and adjusted the cap, making sure it sat firmly on her head. "See, you think this is just a hat, just a slogan, but it's more than that." She glanced at the audience, making eye contact with people who had probably been told, just like her, that their beliefs made them the enemy. "This cap represents hard work. It represents the factory workers who lost their jobs and finally got them back. It represents small business owners who refused to give up, who fought through impossible odds. It represents soldiers who put their lives on the line so we could sit here, in this very room, and have this conversation freely." A ripple of energy moved through the crowd. Even those who disagreed with her were listening now. "You call it divisive," she continued. "But tell me, when did loving your country become controversial? When did standing up for the forgotten people become offensive? Because that's what this represents. The host shifted in his chair, opening his mouth to respond, but she wasn't finished. The real intolerance is, she leaned forward slightly, her expression still calm, but her words cutting through the air like a blade. You say this cap offends people, but let's talk about what actually offends people. She held up one finger. People are offended when they see others succeed without asking for permission. A second finger. People are offended when someone dares to think for themselves instead of following the script society handed them. A third. And people are offended when they realize they can't bully others into submission. A murmur moved through the crowd. The host looked momentarily rattled. You claim to stand for tolerance, but let's be real. This isn't about tolerance. It's about control. The audience gasped. You don't want unity, she said. You want compliance. You want people to think the way you think, speak the way you speak, believe what you believe. And when they don't, you mock them. You silence them. You tell them to take it off. The host's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. Social media erupts. Meanwhile, Twitter was already ablaze. This woman just destroyed the host. She didn't just hold her ground. She flipped the entire argument on him. Whether you like her or not, you have to admit, she made a damn good point. In the studio, the energy shifted. Some audience members who had laughed at her before were now nodding, considering her words. Others sat frozen, realizing they couldn't argue with the logic. The host swallowed, trying to regain control. You still didn't answer my question, he said. Why wear something you know will spark controversy? She smiled again. Why live in a way that offends small-minded people? She countered. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The host was stunned. Then she delivered the final blow. This cap isn't just fabric and stitching. It's a symbol, not of division, but of determination, of resilience, of freedom. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. And freedom means I don't have to take it off just because it makes you uncomfortable. The audience erupted into applause. The host had no response. The moment was sealed. The studio was no longer the host's domain. For the first time that night, he wasn't the one controlling the conversation. His usual smirk had faded. His mouth opened slightly as if to form a rebuttal, but no words came out. The silence stretched. The woman sat still, unshaken. She had spoken her truth, and now the weight of it hung in the air. It started with a few nods, hesitant at first, then more confident. A middle-aged man in the front row, who had laughed at the host's jokes earlier, now seemed deep in thought. A young woman who had looked ready to boo a moment ago now bit her lip, considering what she just heard, then a slow clap. From the back of the room, someone started applauding. A few more joined, and suddenly half the audience was clapping. Some were even standing. The host, still reeling, forced a chuckle. Wow, looks like you've got some fans. The woman didn't gloat. She simply looked at him and said, or maybe people just respect the truth when they hear it. Another ripple of applause. While the moment unfolded on air, Twitter was already on fire. She just schooled that host. Whether you agree or not, she made some powerful points. Respect. This is why we need more voices like hers. That was the definition of standing your ground. I usually don't like Trump supporters, but damn, she actually made sense. Didn't expect that. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Within minutes, clips of her response were everywhere. Some accounts tried to spin it differently, cutting the video to make her look bad. But the full clip had already gone viral. The truth was out, and people were watching. Unexpected supporters speak up. That's when things really got interesting. A well-known liberal journalist tweeted, "You don't have to agree with her politics to respect the way she handled that. That was class." A Hollywood actor, one known for his left-leaning views, posted, "I'm not a fan of Trump, but I'm also not a fan of silencing people just because we disagree." She made a solid argument. Props to her. More and more unexpected voices chimed in. People who would normally stay silent or avoid anything remotely pro-Trump admitted the obvious. She had turned the tables in a way no one saw coming. The host tries to regain control, but it's too late. Back in the studio, the host cleared his throat. "Well, this has certainly been an interesting conversation," he said, forcing a chuckle. "But let's not forget," the woman simply raised a hand. "You don't need to explain yourself. People heard everything they needed to hear." The audience erupted again. The host's face twitched with frustration, but he knew it. She had won, not by yelling, not by playing the victim, but by standing firm. And now the world was watching. The moment was no longer just a debate on a TV show. It was everywhere. Within minutes of the broadcast, Twitter, or X, was on fire. The clip of her response spread like wildfire. Trending number 1, Chalk his stand your ground. Trending number 2, It was MAGA clapback. Trending number 3, freedom to believe people who had never heard of her were now watching, commenting, debating. This was the most powerful takedown I've ever seen on live TV. Whether you like Trump or not, she just exposed the double standard in the media. Imagine being that host and thinking you had her cornered, only to get wrecked on national television. TikTok edits with dramatic music flooded the platform. YouTube commentators analyzed her every word. Instagram meme pages turned her final mic drop into reaction videos. News media reaction. Left-leaning media scrambled to control the narrative. MAGA supporter sparks debate on TV. Was she right? Host faces backlash after confrontation goes viral. Meanwhile, conservative outlets hailed her as a hero. She took a stand, and America listened. TV host tries to shame her, ends up speechless. But no matter how it was spun, the truth was clear. This was a moment people wouldn't forget. Trump weighs in, and then the ultimate twist. Late that night, Donald Trump himself posted on Truth Social. What a great response. Strong, fearless, and speaking truth. This is exactly what America needs. MAGA, and respect. The internet exploded again. Suddenly, she wasn't just a guest on a talk show. She was a symbol of standing your ground. She started receiving interview requests, invitations to speak at events. Even people who disagreed with her politics admitted they respected how she handled the moment. This wasn't just about a hat anymore. It was about standing firm in what you believe, no matter the pressure. And one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. This moment was never just about a hat. It was about freedom. The freedom to express your beliefs without fear. The freedom to stand tall, even when the world tells you to shrink. It was about respect, not just for one political side, but for the fundamental right of every person to hold their own values without being mocked or silenced. And most of all, it was about courage. The courage to speak when others want you silent. The courage to defend your identity, even when it's unpopular. As she stood there, her MAGA cap still on her head, she looked directly at the camera and said, "If we start apologizing for who we are, we lose everything. So no, I won't take it off, and neither should you." The room was silent. The host had no comeback, and the world was watching. What do you think? Should we be ashamed of our beliefs or stand proud? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more powerful stories.